شكرا جزيلا على حضوركم واستماعكم. ننتقل الآن إلى جلسة حوارية ومقابلة مع جرافين فينتشرز عن الاتجاهات المالية لمستثمري التكنولوجيا. تدير الحوار الأستاذة سونيا واي مالر.
Hello and welcome. Is this on? No, not that we need it. Hello and welcome, everyone. We have quite a meaty topic to address today in this fireside chat. The idea is to pick Nabil's brains. Nabil is the president and managing member of Graphene Ventures. He's based in the US, but he is from the region originally. And what we want to do is we want to leverage Nabil's experience to map out the disruptive verticals that we're seeing in the tech sector these days, the ones that should probably be on your radar, and we also want to hear about the ones that he thinks may be overhyped. The way I want to approach this is, because it's about investing, is I want to focus on the investor side of the equation. How many people in the room have actually invested in tech ventures before? Raise your hand. All 10 of you. No one. Are any of you interested in investing in tech ventures? All right, so hopefully you can convert some. Let's start with your journey, Nabil. You now live in the US. You were born and raised here. How did you end up over there, and how did you end up starting Graphene Ventures?
Well, probably part of the nature of trying new stuff and new ventures. I've started like 3 companies prior of me moving to the US. And we went into 3 different verticals. We did sports, telecom, and media. And at a certain point, I decided needed to probably try something new. And I've been visiting Silicon Valley for the past almost 14 years. And it was kind of a smooth move, but when I first went there, I didn't know what I'm going to do. So it was not all about investment. Having the entrepreneurial DNA, I still probably have my own startup, but I ended up investing because just part of the analysis, I've noticed that there's a gap between Silicon Valley and the Middle East when it comes to technology investments. Everybody looks at it when it's almost late. And it's very rare when someone looks at a company at a very, very early stage. And that's where we started looking at those companies, but we decided to start with pre-IPO companies because they were the low-hanging fruits. So that's how the whole story started. And we did the mega thing that we started out with was the Snapchat investment, and we went on Lyft and the other stuff from there.
You've invested in Snapchat and Lyft. Those are the 2 beacons right now so far in your portfolio, right?
Yeah, so basically the pre-IPO companies give us the size and actually proves the theory that we do have the connections and the network. And the early stage companies where we seed them, it actually it proves that you already have an eye for technology and for early startups and early stage companies. And I guess that's the most essential part when you're talking about VC.
So obviously a lot of us hear about tech disruption and there's robotics and quantum mechanics and all this stuff. But when you're looking at disruptors, like technology disruptors, as an investor, what should you be looking at specifically in terms of indicators? Is it regulatory approval? Is it corporate adoption? Is it big tech giants, acquisition strategies? How do you know as an investor that the timing is right and that you haven't actually missed the boat already?
Well, it depends on the sector. So at some sectors, you do look at the regulatory part. But when it comes to consumer products, for instance, you would look at the team, you would look at the acquisitions and the corporate adoption, and actually the need in the market. And is there a friction which is being fixed or not? That's the most essential part that we look at. And eventually, you just keep watching the trends, and you try actually sometimes to predict the trend, because some people, whoever comes in once the trend is already out there, I guess they're some kind of, to us, considered to be latecomers. So probably, if you talk about cryptocurrencies, for instance, I think whoever is coming now is kind of coming up late. But if you predicted that like 7 or 8 years ago, not even 3, 4 years ago, is the kind of prediction that we look for.
When you talk about cryptocurrency, so I run an angel syndicate out of Dubai, and we've made quite a few investments all over the world. And so I obviously started looking at cryptocurrencies and felt like I was completely unknowledgeable. So what I did is I basically holed myself up on a Saturday all day, and I just watched YouTube video after YouTube video after YouTube video. So when you're looking at specific technologies, whether it be AI or robotics or even crypto, what's the level of knowledge that you need to have in order to know as an investor that you're making the right bet, that this is the technology that you should be investing in? Because, you know, we were talking yesterday, and you obviously have a level of expertise around AI and robotics, but what did you do in order to acquire that knowledge? Did you also hold yourself up at home like I did and watch YouTube video after, and just do reading and nonstop? Like, how do you acquire that knowledge? Because it's one thing to be a passive investor, sorry to interrupt, and be like, oh, cool, like AI sounds cool, like I want to invest in that. But then there's another thing about, okay, I want to actually understand what I invest in. And I think as investors in the room, you guys need to think about that as well. Do you want to be a passive investor and just kind of follow the herd mentality of like, all right, I don't know much about robotics, I trust Nabil, so I'm just going to invest in this robotics company? Or do you want to be an investor as a personal investor where you're like, okay, you know what, I want to invest in robotics, but I also want to understand what I'm investing in, so I can actually take a proactive role in that?
Well, if you're doing Saturdays, I do 7 days a week, so that's a bit of a different. We research all the time. I make sure that I'm surrounded with subject matter experts. So if I'm talking about, eventually, if for a fund like ours where we're pretty opportunistic and agnostic, you don't have the knowledge of everything. So eventually, you have to have others working with you. So we do have a network of advisors and what I like to call subject matter experts. The high level is always important from our side. So we have to be convinced. And when it goes to the deep dive, the subject matter expert takes over. But on the overall, it's just personal research and plus the team research. Like we're 3 full-timers, so we look at different sectors as per the capacity that we already have.
And yesterday you were saying, just so everyone knows, Nabil reads 3 to 4 hours a day. That's his research every day that he does on the various topics that he's interested in investing in.
I guess that's the only way to stay ahead of the game. I always have this theory that you have to stay 3 steps ahead of everybody else. And that was like back in the days. When you get to the VC, you have to be at least 30 steps ahead, not 3 steps ahead.
Because that's what you were saying yesterday again, was that the main challenge in this specific area is basically missing the boat. And all these the good ones, like the good deals going by so fast.
And the reason is because the good deals don't even come to the surface unless they're already known. You would see them in stealth mode. They're not on demo days. They're not actually even doing something that everybody knows about. So we do utilize scouts. So we have a scouting program whereby if someone looks at a company, even if it's a stealth mode, they tell us about it, and we look at the company, we approach them. Similar like the other ones. So I'm not reinventing the wheel. So at least I looked at the best practice and I tried to adopt it.
All right. So what's interesting about your profile is that you have 1 foot in the US, you have 1 foot in this region. So back to the actual topic, which is the hot tech trends to invest in. You have a pulse for what's happening on both the supply and the demand side. So the supply, meaning like what types of startups are kind of emerging, and the demand side of the types of startups that investors are looking to invest in. So I'd be curious to know, given that you have kind of this dual approach or this dual vision, of what are the top 3 sectors, tech sectors, that you're seeing emerge from the startup side in the US and from the investor point of view as well? And then how is that different, if at all, from what you're seeing here in this region?
Well, definitely blockchain sits on top.
Who here is familiar with blockchain? All right, a lot of you have to do a lot of reading then. Definitely read up on blockchain.
So blockchain is sits on top because we look at it as diversifying the, or let's say democratizing the way that technology works today. And then we look into AI because it utilizes part of this, I mean, almost everything that we look at today. And we think that there is a huge change that's going to come up in the next year or 2. And the reason is alongside the quantum computing that's going to come up.
Can you explain, who understands quantum computing?
It becomes more
You're
of
a very smart
computer
man back
science
in the
thing.
back. All right, do you want to just give a one-liner on what quantum computing is?
So in very short, we're talking about the next generation of computers. If the previous ones was basically built in binary ways, like the zeros and ones, the quantum computing comes on qubit, so the 0 and 1 becomes almost comes in one state, and the power that you get is kind of exponential compared to the ones that we see today. So, for instance, if you talk about a 50 qubit computer, quantum computer, would actually be stronger than any supercomputer that we have seen until today. And the power, and this basically gives like a superpower to each computer. And we're talking about supercomputers, not the ones that we're using today. And we would see this coming out in the next 3-4 years. Google's already applying that, and it's kind of they're trying to actually come up with some kind of a mixed technology between what D-Wave is doing and IBM. And this is basically going to even crack blockchain itself. And that's, I mean, today when we see blockchain, and that's one of the beliefs I have, most of the new technologies we see come in on the military side, and then they come up to the commercial side. So by the time they come up to the commercial side, there is something else which is like superpower working on the other side, which is today the quantum computing power. And this is going to be disrupting the blockchain itself. It's going to be disrupting the cryptocurrency that we see today. Probably a lot of people talk about Bitcoin and stuff. We see more than 1,930 cryptocurrency around the world. My belief is at least 1,900 of them are going to vanish within the next 5 years. So that's going to be a big disruption.
Mm. So again, sorry, back to the initial question then. So this is what you're seeing in the US. What do you feel when you come back here? Like, what are the kind of top 3 sectors that you see here emerging, again, from the startup side and then from the investor interest point of view as well?
Everybody talks, okay, probably the reason before I get to the sectors is the big difference that you see when you shift from US and probably mainly California coming into the region is you already have the deep learning side, you have the technology side, you have the development side. When you come here, it's mainly traders, so people like buying and selling, marketing and business development. That's what people are good at. And that's why you see very good branding, but lousy user experience. And that's why people are focused on the marketing side, but not focused on the technology side. A lot of people now, one of the major questions I always ask, what kind of technology are you using on your platform? And everybody talks about Magento, which is kind of phased out today on the new technology side. And I try to push them towards the new one. It's a little bit more expensive, but if you want to be acquired or you want to actually have a technology asset, you need to move to the new ones, not to the ones that are outdated. And when you keep tracking these things, you realize the fact that people are going to look at e-commerce because it's easy, because that's what they're used to. Again, most of the stuff that we see there is, in Saudi Arabia, I think there are over 40 delivery platforms today. Like everybody's delivering. I don't know what are they delivering, but as if the delivery is becoming the real problem. And I would not blame them at some point. I might be sound like I'm conflicting with myself, but I think the real limitation is a regulation issue. Everybody's scared that they can't get the license and they don't want to fight. And probably even the investors are not going to support them to fight. So everybody tries to work within the regulation environment, and that's not the way that startups work. Startups are there because they need to push the boundaries of the regulation. If you're not pushing, nothing's going to happen.
So you're saying on the investor front, the investors themselves also are sticking to the e-commerce platforms, the branding platforms, the media platforms that they understand, because they're also afraid of pushing the boundaries.
They're afraid and they don't want to take risks. I mean, they feel that it's enough for them that they're taking a technology risk, so they don't want to go even against the regulator and start having their own lobbying. So again, lobbying is missed. But I guess now with the Vision 2030 stuff and the transformation that the whole country is going through is something that should be promising and allowing more entrepreneurs to push the boundaries.
Which is interesting, because this is also something that we discussed, which is in general, there's this top-down approach when it comes to disruption in the region, right? So, I mean, I'm based in Dubai, obviously. You know, Sheikh Mohammed decides to establish a blockchain council. He wants to commit to the fact that every government entity will be blockchain enabled, etc. Whereas in the US and West Coast specifically, it's more of an organic kind of grassroots, bottoms-up approach, where here it has to come from the top.
It's simply, I think it's an economy structure thing. So if you look at the economy depends on the government. And that's why you probably would see the top-down approach, whereby in the U.S. you would see the economists are actually the ones who are driving the policy in the country. So it's the economy's power, and whoever have the capital would push for the stuff they want. And we probably see this very clear today on something like Bitcoin, where nobody knows who the founder is, but it's being adopted almost nationwide and day after day. If this was to happen here, actually on the contrary, a friend of mine who works in Sama, which is almost the equivalent of central bank, tells me that every day they receive an email telling them that this is fraud, don't touch it. So that shows you like the big gap between the two nations. However, sometimes the top-down approach is good because you need just someone to give the green light. Once it's there, everybody goes on. And I hope that this is what we're going to see in the near future.
All right, so top 3 trends, according to Nabil, are quantum computing, AI, and robotics, right? What's being overhyped in your mind?
Cryptocurrency. It's very, I mean, it's
Have you invested? You haven't invested in any crypto?
Nope, not yet.
No regrets?
No.
Okay. Who's invested in any cryptocurrencies? It's okay, I did too. There's just the 2 of us. Anyone here on the right? No?
That's a friend of mine, by the way, who bought it when it was $9.
Well, you must be a rich man, my friend.
Well, he sold it early on, so.
All right, you missed the boat.
So that's a regret, a smile with a regret, probably.
All right, so explain your point of view on that front, then. It deserves an explanation.
If you're talking specifically about Bitcoin, the way I see it, and unfortunately, the way that you see even Bitcoin, it's either believers or non-believers. So the believers think that this is going to go like, some of them talk about 300,000, 600,000.
Or we have the safe betters. I only am dabbling because I'm not sure. I'm in the gray area.
I'll tell you one of my personal problems with it. Personally, first, I think it's very risky to have something which is traded 24/7. I mean, if I am to trade in Bitcoin, I probably buy it when I wake up and sell it by the time I sleep. Because I'm not willing to have a crash while I'm asleep and I wake up like I have nothing. The second thing is, the question is it going to be like the gold 2.0, or is it going to be a tradable currency? So you'll always be shifting between those. I probably lean more towards having it as a storage value currency, and if you go that route, then you're talking about it should be having probably 10 times or even more the value of what it is today. Yet, the regulatory side of it is kind of scary. They're trying to force it, but I don't see it moving much.
What about ICOs?
ICOs.
Initial coin offering for those of you who.
Yeah, so ICO actually empowers entrepreneurs to raise money without having to go to VCs. Now, the risk side here is that you are approaching an ordinary investor who probably is not going through thorough diligence. And the risk here is that, and it happened already, some entrepreneurs, they would just raise money on cryptocurrency through ICOs, take the money, shut the business down, and the guy is not there anymore. And there is no any kind of protection. US today, as SEC, I think 4 months ago, they started regulating ICOs. So the first batch went without being monitored, but the new ones, everybody looks at the securities, and it is kind of regulated. So not all companies can do ICOs, or let's say underwrite an ICO somehow. However, it becomes somehow of an alternative to the entrepreneur to raise money. But I guess this might raise the valuations of startups. I would not touch some of the ICOs, not all, because some of them are actually has a value in it. But again, right now what's going to happen is if previously VCs were actually doing the diligence on your behalf, today you have to do the diligence yourself. And you're again democratizing the capital and distributing wealth. So from distribution of wealth is good because previously, if you want to be an investor in a startup, you have to invest in a fund. And if you're someone who's good and can make the diligence and the calls on the companies, it would be much easier for you to go and invest directly in the company. The companies used to refuse it, and everybody would take the approach of getting into a VC because that's what they want. But today, that's kind of democratized because you can basically participate in the ICO directly without having to go through a VC fund. You don't have to pay any management fees. You don't have to pay any carried interest. But it depends on your skills. You have to be really good in doing the diligence.
All right. So Nabil has spoken. We have time for one question, and then yes. Tell us about machine learning, Nabil.
So we start to enable machine learning. One of the things, and I think that in 2018 we'll see a big shift in it, is the cloud. So once the cloud actually be more efficient, and along with AI, and that's a battle between Amazon and Google. And we think that I personally, I'm not a big Google fan, but I think that Google's going to do better because of the AI side and the quantum computing. So if you start associating the cloud along with quantum computing, an AI engine in the middle, eventually it will empower machine learning 10 times what it is today, and probably even more. Actually, I've seen one of the numbers that it says 100 million times better than today. So if you're talking about 100 million, so it means like you're going to get a response so fast. And eventually what you're trying to do is enable the machine to start understanding what's going to happen. This will disrupt a lot of medicines, science, and a lot of medical solutions are going to change. And that's why you would hear probably a lot of people talking about better health in the next 100 years, where they think that people will live for 100 and 200 years. And the only reason for that, to believe that, is kind of the AI, machine learning, and quantum computing, because that's the first thing that it will touch. Today, to get the results, it takes a lot of time, but the time is going to be, I mean, what used to take days will take seconds. And that is where I think a lot of machine learning will happen in the near future. And actually, this is one of the major sectors that we look at, is the bioinformatics side and a lot of the medical solutions.
The end of humanity. All right.
Well, the non-end, actually.
We have one more question, and then Fatima will kick us off stage. Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, actually, you told about the Bitcoin, and I want to ask about the Bitcoin. How Bitcoin prices are growing up day by day? Means what are those factors through which, means let's suppose when mobile phone came into being, and we can easily get this is not being happened before, and so maybe this is a unique product, and so its prices are high due to monopolistic competition or anything else. But for Bitcoin, what are those factors specifically which are growing, means the price of Bitcoin day by day? I want to invest in Bitcoin, but I never, because like you, because I was thinking maybe in the night when I will sleep, and after that when I wake up, it will crash and everything. It means I don't have any proof that I have Bitcoin on today. If it's at $10,000, and tomorrow maybe it's around zero. So what are those factors do you think that upon which Bitcoin prices are growing up day by day?
To be fair, that can also happen with startups that you invest in, by the way.
Yeah. So it's a supply and demand thing. In the past 6 weeks, there is over 500,000 people who invested in Bitcoin. So you're talking about a kind of supply and scarce demand. The thing that I keep asking is, like, how many people are selling it? And if until today we have almost, the latest I've checked, like 2 days ago, there was 16.7 million Bitcoins out there. And they're talking that the whole capacity of Bitcoins is 21 million. For the next 4.5 million of Bitcoins, which are already still have not been mined, it's going to take, according to the numbers that they're talking about, by 2140. So it's not in my age, not in yours. At least not in mine, for sure.
Unless you live forever, according to what you just said.
Well, I'm not hoping for that. But if you're looking at this formula, so you're one way or the other talking about a scarce supply, and it keeps happening based purely on supply and demand. It's just like a pure stock. The question is, most of the stocks you have some indicators that would tell you what's happening to this stock if you want to actually understand the behavior of a company and the performance of a company. Bitcoin does not have all these things. You can't understand the behavior. There is nothing that you can analyze. The only thing is that you have to keep a track of who's selling and who's buying. And then there is a big difference between the exchanges because each exchange sets their own price. So it's not a universal price that you see. If it's 17,000 somewhere, it might be 15,000 somewhere else. But people look at the global price, so they look at the universal price, but it depends on where you are and the exchange that you're using once you're doing the trade. So it's a pure trade thing.
Can you just explain, oh yeah, and then I promise we'll get off the stage. Can you just explain what happened in Chicago this week? Because I think that's...
Yeah, so one of the major issues that happened with Bitcoin is institutional investors refused to get on Bitcoin because, again, especially institutions, when they want to invest, they have to do their own analysis. And there is no whatsoever analysis that you can do when it gets to Bitcoin. What happened last week in Chicago is that the exchanges accepted to take in futures. So futures became somehow something that institutional investors are used to, and it is expected that institutional investors will start buying futures, and it's kind of a bet. So eventually what you're doing is you're not buying the Bitcoin, but you're buying a future contract and at a certain price. So you're placing a bet with a certain time, and if it hits that strike price, you're basically making probably more money than what you would do on the Bitcoin itself, whether it's buying or selling. Now this actually, I see more activity on Bitcoin because it will allow shorting Bitcoin, which was not available before. So you'll see a lot of shorting happening. I mean, whoever wants to take a short position or a long position depends, through future contracts. So it's kind of legalizing Bitcoin somehow and taking more approval on a nationwide thing and bringing institutions into it. Yet, and I also hear like McDonald's are going to accept Bitcoin next year, but I don't know, like, are you going to take a Bitcoin?
In Saudi?
No.
Oh.
Well, in Saudi, I think it's going to take a long time to get to the Bitcoin stuff. But again, even if McDonald's take it or anybody else take it, you're talking about, is Bitcoin going to replace the dollar or is it going to replace the gold? Which is a very tough question. I'm not in a position to answer it right now. But I still research. I've been researching Bitcoin for the past 5 months, by the way. And I could not understand it, despite like I mean, I'm willing even to just publicly make all the documents that I looked at public and the books that I've read, but I understand blockchain and I like it. I'm probably more pro Ethereum, and I look at Ethereum like an app store for a blockchain platform. And the only threat that I would see to Ethereum is Apple and Google, because if those guys decide to have an app store which is based on blockchain, then they're going to knock off Ethereum. Otherwise, Ethereum will always be good.
So maybe buy Ether instead of Bitcoin.
I'm not saying buy or sell.
But sorry, just before we get on to you, I just dabbled in it because I was seeing our investors also, Sonia, like, you know, tell me about Bitcoin. So I just bought 2,000 dirhams, UAE dirhams. I did 1,000 Bitcoin. I did 1,000 Ether via BitOasis, which is the regional platform that you can buy these on. And I just did it so I had a little skin in the game, so that it would kind of urge me to kind of, okay, now I put 2,000 dirhams. Like let me get a feel for it. Like, ooh, where's my 1,000 Bitcoin? Like 0.08 Bitcoin at now, you know? So I'm not gonna encourage you to buy Bitcoin or whatever. But I think, like anything, it's the same with angel investing or investing in startups. Unless you practically start doing it, you're never really going to get into it or try to understand it. You're just going to continue just watching.
Yeah.
No offense.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Can we have one more? Or oh, okay. Can I just stay here all day? No, she canceled. Okay. All right, please go ahead.
On the blockchain, so it applies almost to everything. So if you look at the smart contracts and the way that it works, and that's why I was telling I'm probably pro Ethereum because the way that smart contracts work. Now you have several technologies that you can look at here. So if you look at Ripple, where everybody hates it today, most of the blockchain people, believers by the way, hate Ripple because it acts like a closed environment. So it's kind of, if you look back in the days, it's like Linux versus Microsoft. So Microsoft was kind of closed and that was like open source. And that was where people looked at the differences between Ripple and Ethereum. It definitely would disrupt a lot of, or let's say, before even disrupting, it cuts the middleman. So that's the basic thing about blockchain technology. You're cutting all the middlemen and sometime, and people probably don't like it, but they're disrupting the government work. So if you're talking about currencies, you don't need to go back to a central bank. If you're talking about health records, you probably don't need to talk to any central authority which is controlling those records. So eventually, you're disrupting governments, and that's something which, is it the right thing to do or not? I don't know, but I think governments need to move fast, and that's what we see in some countries. So if you look at Estonia, and I think Estonia is a very good example for people to look at, Estonia decided to turn the whole government on blockchain. So they're doing health, education, even currency. So they're looking almost into every aspect of blockchain, and I think it's a very good case study to whoever wants to look at it. I'm one of the persons who plan to go to Estonia next year because I want to see what's going on and understand, like, from just being on the ground. So that's one aspect. Well, I can't hear you. Well, it depends. Your machine has to be much stronger than what it is today. The power that you get to enable blockchain is enormous. The mining machines are not. Consumes a lot of energy. Going back to the Bitcoin now, to get 1 Bitcoin a year, to get 1 Bitcoin, it takes anywhere between 10,000 to 12,000 kilowatt hours. So you're talking about an energy that would, based on the US consumption of energy, this is almost 1 year consumption of power. So it's not easy. And it basically gets more complicated as we go. Going back to the investor side, it depends. What kind of investors? I mean, are we talking about, if we're talking about technology investors and venture capital, everybody's watching very closely the regulations and the way they work. But again, it's not going to be, there is a big change that needs to happen. It's not about Visa. It's not about just giving me a license to have a fund in Saudi. Even though that you can do all these things today, it might allow local LPs to set their own VCs. But the problem is, even local VCs, and I would be very interested to look at the experience of Taqniya or probably ST Ventures or any of the local funds or even Wa'ad and Aramco, because normally VCs prefer to have preferred stock when investing in companies. And from what I know, at least until this minute, most of the companies, you would only either get common stock or maybe convertible note if somebody is actually today understands how convertible note should work, or actually if it's recognized by the system. But as long as you can't have different preferred stock, class of stock each time you're investing, then there is a problem. The thing that I would love to encourage the local economy is, if I look at what is happening in Saudi and what's happening in California, and I don't want to talk about the whole US. California is about 30 million people and Saudi is about 30 million people. But the GDP of California is 2 trillion, so it's almost equivalent to the whole Middle East. And probably it has, because it has defense, media, but technology is a very big thing over there. If we are trying to enable that thing, at least in Saudi, it means that you need to really consider bringing different brains and minds. It's not only attracting capital, because capital will always come. And capital is already there. It does exist. But it's meaningless when someone is having a startup, but they're outsourcing their technology to a company in Pakistan or India or Ukraine or Russia or whatever. If I don't have this technology in-house, for me, it's meaningless. It does not encourage me to invest in the company. Because eventually, if anybody can do that. It becomes just another interface for trading. And that's something that does not encourage me to look at it or even consider for investment.
That's it. No one else? All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Nabil, for all your insight and sharing your experiences with us. And thank you all, gentlemen and ladies, for joining us.
Thank you.
All right.
شكرا لكم جميعا على الحضور والاستماع. بنهاية هذه الجلسة، هذا يعني نهاية جميع الجلسات في القاعة سي، كذلك القاعة بي. أدعوكم جميعا معي للذهاب إلى القاعة A في جلسة أخيرة هناك عن سوق.com، وبرضو الختام حيكون في القاعة A. شكرا جزيلا على حضوركم واستماعكم، يعطيكم ألف عافية، ونراكم إن شاء الله في السنة القادمة في عربنت.